The massive screen flickered to life, casting a blue-white glow across J1 Park's small apartment. He stared at the official message from the Galactic Interspecies Academy, his hand shaking slightly as he read the words again and again. Admission confirmed. J1 Park, Earth representative. It was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. J1 remembered the day of the application like it was yesterday. It had been a joke, really. A late-night dare from his friends after watching yet another documentary about alien civilizations. They'd spent hours drinking cheap coffee and laughing about how ridiculous it would be for a human to apply to the most prestigious intergalactic educational institution in the known universe. Just fill out the form, his best friend Min had said. What's the worst that could happen? Now, staring at the acceptance letter, J1 realized the universe had a strange sense of humor. He was 23, barely out of his university studies in environmental science, with nothing more than a handful of research papers and a passion for understanding how life adapts to extreme conditions. The Galactic Interspecies Academy was legendary, a place where thousands of alien species sent their absolute best and brightest. Creatures that could breathe underwater, survive in temperatures that would freeze or burn a human in seconds, beings with multiple brains and communication methods humans couldn't even imagine. And somehow, he was going to be their classmate. The apartment felt too small suddenly. J1 walked to the window, looking out at the busy Soul Street below. People rushed past, completely unaware that one of their own was about to step into a world no human had ever entered before. His communication device buzzed. It was his mother. "Did you see?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and worry. "I saw," J1 replied, trying to sound calm. "I don't understand how this happened." The truth was, neither did the Galactic Council. What they didn't know was that a small error in their massive database had mixed up his application with a recommendation from a remote research station. A recommendation that highlighted his unique study on extremophile bacteria found in the most impossible places on Earth. One tiny mistake. That was all it took. J1 began to pack. He didn't have much. Some clothes, his research notes, a few personal items. Most of his scientific equipment would be provided by the Academy. But he packed carefully, knowing this might be the most important journey any human had ever taken. The next morning, a sleek silver vehicle waited outside his apartment. It stood out dramatically against the typical city traffic, clearly not of human design. Its surface shifted and shimmered, almost like it was breathing. A holographic message appeared as he approached. J1 Park. Transportation to Galactic Interspecies Academy. Departure in 15 minutes. His mother hugged him tight. "Be careful," she whispered. "Remember who you are." Who he was. A human. The only human selected for this program. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. The vehicle's door opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. Surfaces that seemed to change color and texture with each movement, screens that appeared and disappeared like magic, and a navigation system that looked more like a living organism than a machine. As he sat down, a universal translator device attached itself to his ear. A soft voice spoke, not in Korean, not in English, but in a language that somehow made perfect sense to him. "Welcome, Representative Park. Your journey to the Galactic Interspecies Academy begins now." J1 took a deep breath. He was about to become the first human to study at an intergalactic school. No pressure. The vehicle began to move, and the familiar streets of Seoul started to blur. In moments, he would be leaving everything he knew behind. One small step for a man. One giant leap for humanity. The Galactic Interspecies Academy looked nothing like any school J1 had ever imagined. Massive crystal structures twisted into impossible shapes, floating platforms connected by streams of soft light, and an atmosphere that seemed to breathe and change with every passing moment. J1 stood at the entrance, feeling smaller than he ever had before. Around him, students from across the universe moved in patterns that defied human understanding. A creature with 3 heads and skin that looked like moving glass floated past him. Another student, who seemed to be made entirely of blue energy, pulsed and shifted as it communicated with a rock-like being. He checked his admission papers again. They were real. Somehow, impossibly real. The orientation hall was a nightmare of sensory overload. Sounds that weren't really sounds moved through the air. Colors that didn't exist in human vision danced around the edges of his vision. J1 blinked hard, trying to focus. Earth Representative Park. A deep voice called out. A massive being approached him. Professor Elaine towered at least 3 meters tall, with a body that seemed part insect, part reptile, and part something completely unknown. 6 eyes, each a different color, studied J1 with an intensity that made him want to take a step back. The professor's body shifted slightly. Scales rippled like water, changing colors from deep green to a shimmering silver. A universal translator hanging from J1's ear began to convert the professor's communication. Interesting, Professor Elaine said. The word came out as both a statement and a challenge. J1 swallowed hard. Thank you for the welcome, he managed to say. Other students began to gather around. Some looked curious. Most looked confused. A few appeared openly hostile. J1 was used to being the odd one out, but never like this. He was literally the only human in an entire galaxy of students. The first class was xenobiology, a subject that combined biology, planetary science, and something that seemed more like magic than science. As students took their seats, J1 realized the seats were not seats at all. Some students hung from gravity-defying platforms. Others merged with liquid-like surfaces. A few seemed to exist in multiple places at once. Professor Elaine began the lecture. The universal translator worked overtime, converting complex scientific concepts that seemed to break every rule of biology J1 had ever learned. Life, the professor began, is not what you humans think it is. J1 leaned forward. This was his chance to prove himself. The lecture covered adaptive survival mechanisms of species from thousands of different planets. Most students looked confused or bored, but J1's background in extreme environmental biology suddenly became his secret weapon. When Professor Elaine described a species that lived inside active volcanoes, J1's hand shot up. I studied similar extremophile bacteria on Earth, he said. They used chemosynthesis to survive in conditions that would destroy most organic matter. The entire class went silent. 6 alien eyes fixed directly on him. Explain, Professor Elaine demanded. J1 took a deep breath. He described his research on bacteria found near deep-sea thermal vents, organisms that survived extreme pressure, complete darkness, and temperatures that would melt most materials. He talked about how these tiny creatures adapted, changed, and survived against all odds. The class listened, really listened. Some students looked surprised. Others looked impressed. A few looked like they were seeing something completely new. Professor Elaine's scales shifted to a deep, vibrant blue. A color the translator suggested indicated intense interest. Interesting, the professor said again. But this time, it didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like the beginning of something else. As the class ended, J1 realized he had done something unexpected. In a room full of the most advanced students from across the universe, he had managed to catch their attention. Not because he was the strongest or the biggest or even the most advanced, but because he understood something fundamental about survival. Adaptation is not about being the strongest. It's about being the most flexible. The first day was over, and J1 Park had just begun to show what a human could do. The survival challenge was not just a test. It was a nightmare designed to break students. J1 stood with his assigned team at the entrance of a massive simulation chamber. Around him, alien students from different planets looked confident. Some had extra limbs. Some could breathe toxic gases. Others could change their body temperature at will. And then there was J1. just one human. A holographic instructor appeared. Its body was made of pure light, shifting and changing with every word. "Welcome to the Galactic Survival Simulation," it announced. "Your team will face the most extreme conditions from across the known universe. You must work together. You must survive." The chamber transformed instantly. One moment, it was a clean, bright room. The next, it became a landscape of pure chaos. Freezing winds howled from one direction. Burning sand stretched across a landscape that looked like it could melt steel. Razor-sharp crystals grew from the ground, changing shape every few seconds. Gravity seemed to shift randomly, making movement a constant challenge. Most of J1's teammates froze. A six-armed student from a methane-breathing planet looked terrified. A crystalline being from a world of pure energy seemed confused. Another student, who looked like a living cloud of plasma, started to destabilize. J1 knew this was different from any survival scenario he had ever studied. "Listen up," he said to his team. His voice was calm, but it carried a strength that surprised even himself. "We need to work together. Right now." The plasma student looked at him. The universal translator caught its confused communication. "Humans cannot survive these conditions. The probability of our survival is 0.3%. J1 smiled. Humans were good at beating impossible odds. He quickly divided the team into groups. The methane-breathing student could detect chemical changes in the environment. The crystalline being could sense energy shifts. The plasma student could provide light and heat. And J1, he would be the brain. "We need shelter," he explained. "The crystals growing from the ground. They change, but they have a pattern. If we understand the pattern, we can use them for protection." For the next few hours, the team watched the crystal formations. J1 noticed something the others missed. The crystals grew in a specific rhythm. They expanded and contracted based on temperature and gravity changes. "We can build a shelter," he told the team, "using the crystals as living walls." The methane-breathing student looked skeptical, but they had no other options. Using materials from their survival kits and the changing crystals, J1 helped the team construct a shelter. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then the real challenges began. Acid rain started to fall. The temperature dropped to levels that would freeze most organic matter. Gravity became so heavy that movement became nearly impossible. The plasma student began to fade. The crystalline being started to crack. J1 knew they needed to act fast. He used the methane-breathing student's ability to detect chemical changes. They found a way to neutralize the acid rain. He used the crystalline being's energy sensing to predict gravity shifts. The plasma student provided crucial heat and light. Hour after hour, they survived. Other teams had failed long ago, but not this team. Not with J1 leading them. When the simulation finally ended, something incredible happened. The holographic instructor looked confused. "Impossible," it said. "No team has ever survived these conditions." But they had. J1 looked at his teammates. They were no longer just a random group of aliens. They were a team that had beaten impossible odds. The Galactic Survival Challenge was supposed to break them. Instead, it had made them stronger. Something was changing in the Galactic Interspecies Academy. Students whispered. Teachers looked confused. And at the center of it all was J1 Park. After the survival challenge, everything was different. The study hall used to be a quiet place. Now, it was always full. Students from planets J1 had never heard of crowded around his usual spot. They wanted to talk. They wanted to learn. Hai-Jin Kim was the first to really understand what was happening. She was a brilliant student from a crystalline species, with a body that looked like living glass and eyes that could see different types of energy. Where other students saw J1 as just a strange human, she saw something more. "You think differently," she told him one day. Her translator made her voice sound both musical and sharp. "Humans solve problems in ways no one expects." The study groups were the first sign. Students who used to ignore J1 now begged to be in his study group. They wanted to know how he approached problems, how he thought, how he survived. During one xenotechnology class, J1 explained a complex problem using a story about farmers on Earth. He talked about how farmers solved irrigation problems with limited resources. The other students listened like he was telling a magical story. "On my planet," said a student who looked like a living cloud of blue smoke, "we would need 3 computers and a team of engineers to solve what you did with a simple story." The academy had its own social rules. Each species had its own way of learning, of thinking, of solving problems. Some used pure mathematics. Some used complex energy calculations. Some used methods that looked like magic to other species. Humans used something different: creativity, adaptability, the ability to look at a problem from a completely unexpected angle. Hai-Jin became J1's closest ally. She helped him understand the unspoken rules of the academy. He helped her see problems in ways her own species never could. "Your brain is like a puzzle machine," she told him. "It doesn't just solve problems, it breaks them apart and rebuilds them." The other students started to copy J1's study methods. They started to ask questions differently. They began to think about problems in new ways. Some of the older students didn't like this. They had spent years learning the correct way to do things. J1 was showing that there was no single correct way. During a complex xenobiology project, J1 proposed a solution that made no sense to traditional thinking. He connected ideas from different fields. He used examples from Earth's most extreme environments. The teachers were confused. The students were excited. "Humans are chaos agents," one senior student said. But he didn't sound angry. He sounded impressed. J1 wasn't trying to be different. He was just being himself. He approached problems the way he had always approached them, with curiosity, with creativity, with a belief that there was always a solution. The academy was changing, and J1 was at the center of that change. His study notes became legendary. Students traded copies like they were precious treasures. His approach to learning was something completely new. "Humans don't just learn," Hai-Jin explained to another student. "They reimagine everything they learn." The social groups that had existed for generations began to break down. Species that used to never talk to each other now studied together. They shared ideas. They looked at problems in new ways. J1 didn't know he was starting a revolution. He was just trying to survive, to learn, to understand. But sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. The Galactic Interspecies Academy would never be the same again. The Xenotechnology Lab was supposed to be a place of calm, serious work. But today, something was different. J1 stood in front of a holographic display, his fingers moving quickly. Around him, alien students watched with a mix of confusion and excitement. The project was supposed to be simple: create a new communication system that could work across different planetary technologies. Simple, except nothing was ever simple at the Galactic Interspecies Academy. Most students approached the problem with complex quantum entanglement theories. They used advanced mathematical models that looked more like living art than science. Their solutions were perfect on paper, absolutely perfect, and completely useless in real-world conditions. J1 remembered something his grandfather once told him. Sometimes, the old man would say, "The best solution is the simplest one." He started with something unexpected: a communication method inspired by how ants on Earth shared information. Not the complex, high-tech approach everyone else was using. Just a simple, adaptable system. The holographic display began to change. Lines of code danced, transformed, connected in ways no one had seen before. Professor Elaine watched from the corner of the lab. The six-eyed instructor's scales shifted color, a sign of deep interest. "Explain your approach," the professor demanded. J1 took a deep breath. "In nature," he began, "the most successful systems are often the most adaptable. Look at how Earth's ants communicate. They don't use complex technology. They use simple chemical signals that can adapt to any environment. He showed how his communication system could work in extreme conditions. Planets with massive electromagnetic storms, worlds with radiation levels that would destroy most technologies, environments so harsh that other communication methods would fail instantly. The alien students leaned closer. Some looked confused. Others looked excited. Jin Kim, his crystalline friend, understood first. "It's not about having the most complex solution," she said. "It's about having a solution that can survive anywhere." The communication method J1 proposed was elegantly simple. It used basic principles of information transfer, inspired by biological systems. Where other technologies used massive energy sources, his system could work with minimal power. The Research Council was skeptical at first. They were used to complex, energy-intensive solutions. J1's approach seemed too simple, too easy. But then they tested it. In simulations, his communication system worked where others failed. It could transmit information through environments that would destroy other technologies. It could adapt. It could survive. The breakthrough wasn't just technological. It was a new way of thinking about technology. Humans approach problems differently. Professor Elaine said during a senior staff meeting. They don't see limitations. They see opportunities. News of the breakthrough spread quickly. Other research teams wanted to understand how J1 had done it, how a single human student had created something that could change intergalactic communication. The project wasn't just about sending messages. It was about connection, about finding ways to communicate across impossible distances and impossible differences. J1 wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to solve a problem. The way he had always solved problems, by looking at things differently, by being creative, by understanding that the best solutions are often the simplest. The Galactic Research Council invited him to present his findings. Young students from across the galaxy watched his presentation. They saw something important. Innovation doesn't come from having the most advanced technology. It comes from thinking differently. As J1 finished his presentation, the room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. Not just polite applause, but real, genuine appreciation. A human had just changed how the galaxy thought about communication. And this was just the beginning. Not everyone was happy about J1's success. The competitive students of the Galactic Interspecies Academy saw him as a threat. He was just a human. One single human who had somehow become the center of attention. They needed to prove he was nothing special. The first attack came during a group project. Krell, a student from a telepathic species, tried to mess with J1's mind. Telepathic species could normally read thoughts, control emotions, and break down mental barriers. They were masters of psychological manipulation. But J1 was different. When Krell tried to enter his mind, something unexpected happened. Instead of finding a clear mental pathway, Krell found a maze, a complicated, twisting landscape of thoughts that made no sense. Human minds, J1 discovered, were not like other minds. "Your brain is a puzzle," Jin told him later. "It doesn't work like other species' brains." The next challenge came from a group of advanced students. They created a simulation designed to break J1's spirit, a test that combined every possible mental and emotional challenge from across the galaxy. Most students would have collapsed under the pressure. J1 saw it as a game. The simulation threw everything at him. Extreme environments that would drive most beings mad. Emotional challenges that targeted deep psychological fears. Problems that required solving impossible puzzles while facing constant mental attacks. Other students watched in shock. Where most would have broken, J1 adapted. He used creativity. He used humor. He used a mental flexibility that no one had seen before. The simulation was supposed to last 8 hours. J1 completed it in 3. "Humans are weird," one student whispered. But there was respect in the voice. Professor Elaine watched the entire thing. The six-eyed instructor's scales changed colors, a sign of deep interest. Most species had predictable mental patterns. Humans were completely unpredictable. The attacks didn't stop. Some students tried to steal J1's research. Others tried to spread rumors. A few attempted to create social situations that would isolate him. But J1 had something they didn't understand: resilience. Humans had survived on Earth by being adaptable, by facing impossible challenges, by finding solutions when no solutions seemed possible. Hai-Jin became his closest ally. She helped him understand the unspoken rules of the Academy, the social games that other species played. "They want to break you," she explained, "because they're afraid of what you represent." What did he represent? Hope. The idea that being different wasn't a weakness, that creativity could solve problems no amount of advanced technology could fix. The psychological attacks became more complex. Some were direct. Some were subtle. Entire teams of students tried to create scenarios that would make J1 fail. But each challenge made him stronger. He learned their languages. He understood their communication methods. He studied their cultures. Where other students saw barriers, J1 saw opportunities. The Academy had never seen anything like him. Some students began to see him differently, not as a threat, but as something new, something exciting, a different way of thinking about problems. Humans don't just solve problems, one senior student said. They reimagine what a problem can be. J1 wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just being himself. Curious, creative, determined. The psychological warfare was supposed to break him. Instead, it made him stronger, and the entire galaxy was starting to take notice. The final examination was legendary. Every student at the Galactic Interspecies Academy knew about it. A test so complex, so impossible, that it had broken the spirits of the most advanced students from across the universe. They called it the Omega Challenge. J1 stood at the entrance of a massive testing chamber. Around him, students from hundreds of different planets looked nervous. Some had been preparing their entire lives for this moment. Some had special training. Some had technologies that could solve almost any problem. And then there was J1, just one human. The chamber looked like nothing J1 had ever seen. It was not a room. It was not a space. It was something in between. Environments shifted and changed every few seconds. Gravity became a suggestion rather than a rule. Physics worked differently here. A holographic instructor appeared. Its voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Welcome to the Omega Challenge," it announced. "You will face tests that combine every field of study: survival, technology, communication, problem solving, adaptation. Survival is not guaranteed." The first challenge came quickly. Imagine an environment where the ground was alive, where every step could trigger a complete planetary transformation, where communication happened through energy waves that changed faster than thought. Most students froze. J1 remembered something his grandfather taught him. When everything changes, the old man would say, "Be the thing that doesn't break." He watched the environment. He didn't try to fight it. He tried to understand it. Other students used advanced technologies. They tried to control the changing environment. They failed quickly. The environment was too complex, too alive. J1 did something different. He observed. He listened. He learned how the environment communicated, not with technology, but with patterns, with rhythms, with a language that was more feeling than sound. Hours passed. Students dropped out. Their technologies failed. Their mental barriers broke. But J1 kept going. The second challenge was even more complex, a communication problem that required solving multiple interdimensional puzzles simultaneously. Most species could only focus on one puzzle at a time. Humans could context switch. J1 saw the puzzles not as separate problems, but as one big connected system. Where other students saw barriers, he saw connections. Hai-Jin watched from outside the testing chamber. Her crystalline body pulsed with nervous energy. "He's doing something impossible," she told Professor Elaine. The professor's 6 eyes watched carefully. Humans, the instructor said, are impossible. The third challenge tested survival in conditions that would destroy most organic matter. Temperatures that could freeze or burn in seconds. Radiation levels that would break down molecular structures. Pressures that could crush planets. Other students used protective suits, advanced technologies, complex defense mechanisms. J1 used something simpler. He remembered how life on Earth survived in extreme conditions, how bacteria lived in volcanic vents, how plants grew in deserts. Adaptation was not about protection, it was about finding a way to exist. He didn't fight the environment. He became part of it. Hours turned into days. The Omega Challenge continued. Most students had long since failed, but not J1. When the final test ended, something unexpected happened. The holographic instructor went silent. The testing chamber froze. Complete silence. Then, slowly, applause began, not just from the instructors, but from the other students, from species across the galaxy. A human had done the impossible. J1 didn't know he had just changed everything. He was just happy he had survived. The Galactic Interspecies Academy would never be the same again. The Galactic Council meeting was not going well. Hundreds of representatives from different planetary systems filled the massive circular room. Holographic displays showed J1's achievements, but not everyone was happy. One human, said a representative from a crystal-based civilization, cannot change everything we know about education and survival. Hai-Jin stood beside J1. Her crystalline body glowed with determination. She was the only one brave enough to speak for him in this moment. He has proven everything, she responded. Her voice was calm but strong. Humans are not just another species. They are something different. The problem was simple but complicated. J1 had done something no one expected. He had passed every test. He had solved problems that broke other species. He had shown that humans were not just another type of life form. Some council members wanted to study J1 like a specimen. Others wanted to deny his achievements completely. A few saw him as a potential threat. Professor Elaine spoke next. The 6-eyed instructor's scales shifted colors, a sign of deep thought. Humans represent something we do not understand, the professor said. And that makes them dangerous. Dangerous. The word hung in the air. J1 knew what was happening. This was more than just a discussion about his achievements. This was about something bigger. This was about how the galaxy saw life, how the galaxy understood intelligence. The holographic displays showed his achievements, the communication system he developed, the survival techniques he created, the way he solved problems no one else could solve. Some representatives wanted to lock him away, study him, control him. But J1 had something they didn't expect. Friends. Hai-Jin was not the only one who believed in him. Students from the academy, creatures from hundreds of different worlds, had seen what he could do. They knew he was something special. He is not a threat. Hai-Jin told the council. He is an opportunity. The discussions went on for hours. Some representatives argued for sending J1 back to Earth. Others wanted to create special research programs to study him. A few wanted to give him more opportunities to learn and grow. J1 stood quietly. He was used to being different, used to being the only human in the room. The political game was complex. Each representative had their own goals, their own fears, their own understanding of what J1 represented. Some saw him as a weapon. Some saw him as a problem. Some saw him as a chance to learn something new. Professor Elaine made a surprising recommendation. We should not limit him, the instructor said. We should give him more opportunities to learn, to grow, to show what humans can do. The room went silent. Giving J1 more opportunities was a risk, but it was also a chance to understand something new, something different. After hours of discussion, a decision was made. J1 would continue his studies, but he would also be part of special research programs, programs that would help the galaxy understand humans better. When the meeting ended, Hai-Jin looked at Jae-won. "Are you okay?" she asked. Jae-won smiled. "Just another day," he said. But it wasn't just another day. This was a moment that would change everything. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could do, and Jae-won was just getting started. 1 year had passed since Jae-won first arrived at the Galactic Interspecies Academy. The campus looked different now. Something had changed. Students from hundreds of different planets moved differently. They thought differently. They solved problems differently. Humans had become more than just another species. They had become a symbol of something important. Adaptation, creativity, the ability to see the world in a completely new way. Jae-won walked across the campus. Around him, students from species that used to never talk to each other now studied together, shared ideas, looked at problems from new angles. Hai-Jin walked beside him. Her crystalline body reflected the light in ways that seemed to change with every step. "You changed everything," she said. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt like himself. The research center he had helped create was already changing how the galaxy thought about education. No longer was learning about memorizing facts. It was about understanding, about seeing connections, about being flexible. New courses had been created, courses that taught students how to think like humans, how to be creative, how to see problems as opportunities. Professor Elaine watched from a distance. The six-eyed instructor's scales shifted colors, a mix of pride and something else. Excitement, wonder. Humans are not the strongest species, the professor had explained in a recent lecture. They are the most adaptable, the most creative. The communication system Jae-won developed had already changed how different species talk to each other. Planets that used to be isolated now connected easily. Species that could never understand each other now shared ideas. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about something bigger. A new way of thinking about intelligence, about survival, about what it means to be alive in a massive, complicated universe. Other human students began to arrive. Not many, but enough to show that Jae-won was not a mistake, not an accident. He had opened a door. The survival challenge that used to break students now inspired them. Students learned to think like humans, to be flexible, to see problems as chances to learn. Jae-won remembered something his grandfather used to say. "The universe is big," the old man would tell him, "but imagination is bigger." He had proven those words true. The research programs expanded. More humans were invited to study, to learn, to show what they could do. Some alien species still feared humans. Some still saw them as a threat. But more and more began to see them as partners, as friends. During a special ceremony, Jae-won was asked to speak. Hundreds of species listened. "We are not here to be the strongest," he said. "We are here to learn, to grow, to understand." Simple words, but powerful. The campus buzzed with energy. Students from different worlds worked together, shared ideas, saw things in new ways. Hai-Jin looked at him. "You started something," she said. "Something big." Jae-won smiled. He was just happy to be learning, to be exploring, to be part of something larger than himself. The Galactic Interspecies Academy was no longer just a school. It was a place of possibility, a place where different species could come together, could learn from each other. And it had all started with one human, one student who refused to see limitations, who saw every challenge as a chance to grow. As the sun set on another day, Jae-won looked out over the campus. Students from across the galaxy moved and studied together, shared, learned. The universe was changing, and humans were leading the way.